never met my Aunt Ruth. Not really. I was 4 the last time she held me, and I don't remember her face. Only a smell, something like cedar and rain. So when the letter came, telling me she'd died, and left me her house out on Route 9 in Colby County, Ohio, I didn't feel grief. I felt curiosity. Maybe that was my first mistake. The house sat at the end of a gravel driveway that hadn't seen a grader in years, ruts deep enough to scrape the bottom of my car. 3 stories of gray clapboard, a wraparound porch sagging on one side like it was tired of standing. The realtor who'd handled the estate met me there with a folder of papers and a smile that didn't sit right on her face. Too fast, too practiced. Gone the second she thought I wasn't looking. "It's a good house," she said. "Bones are solid, just needs some love." She left before the sun did. That first night I told myself the sounds were normal. Old houses talk, pipes clanking, wood settling, the wind finding every gap in a 100-year-old frame. I lay in the bedroom that had been Ruth's, on a mattress still made up with her sheets, and I listened to the house breathe around me. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not creaking. Footsteps. The specific, unhurried rhythm of someone who knew exactly where to place their feet to avoid the loud boards, which meant someone who'd walked that staircase 1,000 times before. I sat up. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. The footsteps reached the top, paused outside my door and stopped. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that first week. By the 3rd day, I'd started going through Ruth's belongings, more out of boredom than sentiment. Most of it was what you'd expect from a woman who lived alone for 40 years. Quilts, canned preserves, gone soft and gray. A shoebox of photographs I didn't recognize anyone in. But in the back of her closet, behind a false panel that had clearly been added after the house was built, I found a stack of spiral notebooks, journals, dozens of them, going back decades. I want to be honest with you about what I read, because I think it matters. I think it's the reason I'm telling you this at all. The early entries were ordinary. Weather, garden, a man named Wendell she'd been seeing before he stopped coming around. But somewhere around 1987, the tone changed. The handwriting got smaller, tighter, pressed so hard into the paper that some pages had torn. One entry, dated only October, read, "He's back. I know he's back because the mirror in the hall fogs up even when no one showered. And I found the bath water already run this morning cold, like someone had used it and left before I woke. I didn't invite him. I never invite him. He just comes when the house decides it's time." I remember actually laughing alone in that dusty closet, because it sounded like the ramblings of a lonely old woman losing her grip. That's what I told myself. Then I turned the page and found this. The realtor asked if I wanted to sell. I told her no one would want it. She asked why. I told her the truth, that the house doesn't let go of what it's decided to keep. She wrote something down and didn't ask again. I closed the notebook. I told myself I'd read more tomorrow. I didn't sleep well that night either. And somewhere around 3 a.m., half dreaming, I could have sworn I heard water running in the bathroom down the hall. The pipes groaning to life on their own. And beneath that sound, so faint I decided later I'd imagined it. Someone humming. A tune I didn't know. In a voice that wasn't mine and wasn't anyone's, because I was alone in that house. I was alone. I kept telling myself that. By the end of the first week, I'd stopped sleeping in Ruth's old room. I moved to the small guest bedroom at the front of the house. Closer to the stairs, closer to the door. Though I couldn't have told you at the time why that mattered to me so much. It was during that week I noticed the locked door, 3rd floor at the end of a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of mildew and something underneath it, something mineral like old pennies. Every other door in the house opened with the same brass skeleton key I'd found in Ruth's kitchen drawer. Every door except that one. I asked the realtor about it when she came by to drop off more paperwork. She went quiet for a second too long. That would have been sealed by the county, she said. Structural issue, I think. Ruth had it closed off years back. I wouldn't worry about it. I wanted to believe her. But structural issues don't usually come with a deadbolt installed on the outside of a door. The kind of lock meant to keep something in, not keep people out. That night, I went back to Ruth's journals. I needed answers, even ones I didn't want. I found the entry about the room dated almost 20 years earlier. I had Dell come and put the lock on today. He asked me what for, and I told him raccoons. Though we both knew there's no raccoon that knocks 3 times and waits for an answer. I told him, keep it simple. Some doors you don't explain. You just close. 3 knocks. I read that line maybe 6 times before I made myself stop. Further in, entries described what she called the tenant, never named, never described physically, only referenced through what he left behind. Wet footprints on dry floors, a rocking chair in the attic that moved on nights with no wind, the smell of pipe tobacco in a house where no one had smoked in 30 years. He doesn't want to hurt me, one entry read. I don't think that's what he wants at all. I think he wants company. I think he's been alone up here so long, he's forgotten what it's like not to be. And that frightens me more than if he wanted to hurt me. Because loneliness like that, it doesn't ask. It just takes. I put the journal down and sat in the dark for a long time. 2 nights later, I heard the knocking. 3 knocks, exactly as she described, coming from the ceiling above the guest room, which put it directly beneath the locked door on the 3rd floor. Slow, deliberate, patient, in a way that felt worse than urgency would have. I didn't answer, obviously. I lay there with my hand over my own mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, counting my own heartbeat until the knocking stopped, almost 20 minutes later. In the morning, I drove into town, a place called Milner's Crossing, population just under 400, and asked around at the diner about the house on Route 9. I didn't have to ask twice before the waitress's face changed. "You're staying out there?" she said, like I'd told her I was sleeping in a cemetery. "Is my aunt's house?" "Ruth's." She glanced toward the kitchen, then leaned in closer. "My grandmother used to say that house has had the same resident since before it was even finished being built. Not the family who owns it, something that just moved in alongside them, and every family since has had to learn to share." "Share what?" I asked. She didn't answer that. She just refilled my coffee and told me to have a nice day, in the tone people use when they very much hope you won't. I should have left that day. I want to be clear about that. Looking back, I had every reason to get in my car and drive until Colby County was a shrinking shape in my rear view mirror. Instead, I went to the county library because some part of me needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I let myself run from it. The librarian, an older man named Perry, didn't need me to finish my sentence before he knew which house I meant. Ruth's place, he said. Course. Everybody around here knows Ruth's place one way or another. He pulled a thin folder of local history clippings, yellowed newspaper articles going back to the 1950s. What I found in that folder took the ground out from under me in a way Ruth's journals hadn't quite managed. The house on Route 9 had had 6 owners since it was built in 1911. 4 of them, 4 out of 6, had died inside it, or disappeared, and were never found. The earliest article described a farmer named Elias Cobb, the original builder, found dead in the root cellar in 1919. The cause of death listed only as unknown natural causes suspected. His wife had reported, before his death, hearing him talking to someone in empty rooms, always the same phrase over and over according to her account to the sheriff. You can stay, just let the others go. The next owners, a family named Braddock, lasted 11 years before the mother and 2 children vanished on the same night in 1934. The father was questioned and released. He told investigators the house had been asking for the children for weeks before they disappeared, and that he'd finally stopped being able to say no. He was committed to a state hospital 2 years later and never released. Ruth had bought the house in 1979 from an estate sale after the previous owner, a reclusive man named Arthur Voss, was found dead in his bed, undisturbed, no signs of struggle, no signs of illness, just stopped. The county coroner's report, which Perry found for me in a separate folder, listed his age as 61. Ruth had lived there for over 40 years, longer than anyone else on record. Why her? I asked Perry. Why did she last so long when no one else did? He looked at me for a long moment, like he was deciding how much I could handle. Way I heard it told, he said, your aunt didn't fight it. Most people, they move in, they start hearing things, they get scared, they either run or they push back, try to get rid of whatever's there. Ruth didn't do either. Way the story goes, she just let it stay. Made an arrangement with it, if you believe in that kind of thing. Long as it didn't ask for more than she was willing to give, she let it be. What did it ask for? Perry closed the folder. Company, mostly from what people say, and every so often. He hesitated. Every so often when the loneliness got too big even for that arrangement, it asked for someone new. Ruth just made sure that someone new was never her. Wasn't always so lucky for whoever came calling, though. I thought of the wet footprints. The knocking. Company. He's been alone up here so long. I thought about the fact that I was the first person to sleep in that house since Ruth's arrangement, whatever it had been, died along with her. I drove back to the house that evening with a very different understanding of what I might be sharing it with. I decided that night I would sell the house. First thing in the morning, I'd call the realtor, sign whatever needed signing, and never think about Route 9 again. I just had to get through one more night. I should have left immediately instead of waiting for morning. I know that now. Around midnight, the temperature in the guest room dropped hard enough that I could see my own breath. A small pale cloud hanging in front of my face in a house where the furnace was running fine, where every other room stayed warm. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders, and that's when I saw it. On the inside of the window glass, fogged over from the cold, a handprint large, adult-sized, pressed from the inside of the glass, fingers splayed as though someone had leaned their palm flat against the pane and simply left it there. I was on the second floor. There was no ledge outside that window, no way for anyone to have reached it from outside, and no reason for condensation to form a print from the inside unless a hand had actually been pressed there, warm enough to leave an impression before the cold reclaimed the glass. I didn't scream. I want you to understand that. By that point, some numb, functional part of my brain had simply accepted that screaming wouldn't change anything happening in that house. I got up. I walked to the window on legs that didn't feel entirely like mine, and I placed my own hand against the print. It was bigger than mine, broader. A man's hand, I thought, though I couldn't have told you why I was so certain. Behind me, the bedroom door, which I had locked, which I checked twice before getting into bed, swung open on its own, slow and silent. No creak at all, which somehow frightened me more than if it had groaned like every other door in that house. The hallway beyond it was empty. Of course it was empty. But the air coming through that open door was warm, unnaturally warm compared to the room I stood in, and it carried with it the smell Ruth's journals had mentioned. Pipe tobacco, sweet and old-fashioned, the kind nobody had smoked in that house in decades. I heard very softly from somewhere down that warm hallway 3 knocks. Not on a door this time, on nothing. On the air itself, like a formality being observed, a ritual being followed, because it always had been. And then a voice. Low, not unkind, almost gentle in a way that made my skin crawl worse than anger would have. You don't have to be afraid, it said. Ruth wasn't afraid. Not after a while. I didn't answer. I couldn't have, even if I'd wanted to. My throat had closed around anything I might have said. I backed away from the door until I hit the window, the handprint cold against my back through my shirt, and I stood there until the warmth in the hallway faded and the smell of tobacco thinned back into ordinary night air. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the corner of that room with my knees against my chest until the sun came up, and when it finally did, I found something I hadn't noticed in the dark. On the dusty floorboards near the door that had opened on its own, there were footprints, bare feet, adult-sized, leading from the hallway into my room and stopping less than 3 feet from where I'd slept, then turning around and walking back out. I should have left that morning. I keep saying that. I know should have, but I think some part of me had already stopped believing I'd be allowed to. Instead, I did the thing I've turned over in my mind every day since, wondering if it was curiosity or courage, or something the house had already started planting in me the way it had apparently planted itself in every owner before me. I went looking for the root cellar. Elias Cobb had died in the root cellar in 1919. It felt in some way I couldn't fully explain, like the place where all of this had started, and some desperate, exhausted logic told me that if I understood the beginning, I might understand how to make it end. The cellar door was outside around the back of the house, nearly hidden beneath a collapsed trellis of dead ivy. The padlock on it was old, rusted through, and came apart in my hands with barely any effort, as though it had been waiting for someone to finally try. The stairs down were stone, worn smooth in the center from a century of footsteps, and The air that rose to meet me smelled of wet earth and something else beneath it. Something I didn't want to name yet. I used my phone's flashlight. The cellar was smaller than I expected. Maybe 15 feet across. Dirt floor, stone walls, sweating with moisture. Old shelves lined one side. Rotted wood holding what was left of mason jars. Their contents long since turned to black sludge. And against the far wall, half buried in the dirt floor, I found the bones. Not one set. Several. A jumble of them, half exposed, like the earth itself had been slowly trying to give them back over decades. A skull, small enough that I had to sit down hard on the cellar stairs when I understood what I was looking at. And near it, tangled with the larger bones, a smaller, more delicate set that could only have belonged to a child. The Braddock family. The mother and two children who'd vanished in 1934. They hadn't vanished at all. They'd simply never left the house. Not really. The house had kept them the way it had apparently kept everyone it decided not to release, and Ruth, in her decades of careful, quiet arrangement, had known. She had to have known, and she'd chosen to live above it anyway, sharing her home for 40 years. I found tucked into a rotted tin box near the remains one final journal, Ruth's earliest, water-damaged and barely legible, dated just months after she'd first bought the house. The last readable entry said, "I asked him today what happens to the ones who don't agree to stay. He didn't answer in words. He showed me instead. I understand now why the cellar door has a lock. I understand now that the lock was never meant to keep him out. It was meant to remind whoever finds this room that some doors, once you open them, expect something of you in return for what you've seen. I made my choice that day. I hope whoever reads this after me has more courage than I did to make a different one." Behind me at the top of the cellar stairs, the door I'd left open swung shut with a soft, final click. A single bulb hanging from the cellar ceiling, and the one I hadn't even realized was connected to power, flickered once and came on. Standing at the bottom of the stairs between me and the door was a shape that hadn't been there a moment before. Tall, still, patient, the way something can only be patient when it has had 100 years to learn how. I'm not going to pretend I remember every detail of what happened next with perfect clarity. Fear does something to memory. It takes the sharp edges and smooths them into something your mind can survive carrying. But I remember enough. I remember that the shape didn't move toward me. It simply stood there at the base of the stairs, and I understood in the same wordless way I'd understood the handprint was a man's, that it was waiting. The way it had waited for Elias Cobb and the Braddocks and Arthur Voss, and finally for Ruth. The way it had, I now realized, been waiting for me since the moment I'd first driven up that gravel road. "You don't have to be like the others," it said. And the voice was closer to human this time. Close enough that I could hear something almost sad buried underneath it. Ruth understood that. 40 years. And she never once tried to leave. She just asked me for time, and I gave it to her, and in return, she gave me what I asked for. Company. That's all this has ever been. I get so tired of being alone in the dark between visitors. "What happened to them?" I asked, nodding toward the bones I couldn't bring myself to look at again. The ones who said no? The shape was quiet for a long moment. They didn't say no. It finally said, "They said nothing at all." They ran the way you're thinking of running right now. And I am patient, but I am not infinite. A house can only hold its breath for so long, waiting for an answer before it stops waiting. I want to tell you I was brave. I want to tell you I found some clever way to defeat it, some trick or ritual that sent it back into whatever dark it came from. The way these stories are supposed to end, that isn't what happened. What happened is that I said yes, not because I wanted to, because in that cellar, with 100 years of quiet, desperate proof laid out in the dirt at my feet, I understood that no had never really been an option, only the illusion of one, offered so that the choosing would feel like mine. I don't remember climbing the stairs afterward. I don't remember much of the weeks that followed, if I'm honest, except that the house grew quiet again, the way Ruth must have known it, and the knocking stopped, and the cold spots faded, and some nights I catch myself humming a tune I don't know, in a voice that isn't quite my own, and I don't feel afraid of it anymore. That frightens me more than anything else has, if I let myself sit with it too long. I'm recording this because Ruth left her journals for whoever came after her, and I think, somewhere beneath the fear, I understand why. Not as a warning, not exactly. More like company reaching across the years to whoever finds themselves standing at the bottom of those cellar stairs someday, the way I did. If you're hearing this and you're thinking about buying an old house out on some forgotten road with good bones and a story the realtor won't quite finish telling you, ask about the locks. And if the house feels like it's already decided something about you before you've even unpacked your first box, you might already know the answer you're going to give.